On Flashpoints today, we're talking about the one-year anniversary of the Boston Marathon bombing and maybe the lessons we've learned there. Joining me, Juan Zarate. Juan, so we're a year later.
Yeah.
We know what a terrible thing it was last year in Boston. What have we learned from what happened, and how do we make sure this doesn't happen again?
Well, Bob, I think there are three key lessons that come out of the Boston Marathon. One, there are still gaps in how we think about information sharing around terrorist threats, especially when you talk about lone wolves or small cells of individuals that are trying to attack within the homeland. And I think that information sharing gap existed in two ways. One, internationally, we didn't get all the information we needed from Russia, and perhaps we weren't as aggressive in getting some of that information. For example, understanding what the elder Tsarnaev was doing in his later travels abroad in the Caucasus, who he was connecting with. Those are still gaps of information, by the way. We're not quite clear with whom he was meeting or what he was doing. Secondly, information down, sharing of information with state and local authorities. The Boston PD did not know what the FBI knew about the Tsarnaev brothers.
Before the bombing.
Before the bombing,
yeah.
Right. And so there's a real lack and gap in terms of information sharing still, even to this day. Second, how do we handle the radicalization of young people in the United States? These are two guys living among us, had a future ahead of them here in the United States. Other cases like this in the past. How do we deal with domestic radicalization? That's still an issue that we haven't come to grips with. And then finally, a very positive lesson, I think, which is community, a city, population can be resilient in the United States. One of the great fears post 9/11 is how does the United States react to additional terrorist attacks in the homeland? Are we going to cower? Are we going to overreact? And with the whole theme of Boston Strong, of the resilience of the community, the coming together of the community, the medical community, the first responders, and the support system there, that's a real positive message to say, look, we're not going to be cowed by these things. These things may happen. We want to prevent them. But if they do, we can respond and react in a resilient way. So I think those are three key lessons of the Boston Marathon.
So the security folks know it's important to demonstrate we can go on here. That we have to have this event again. We can't be too heavy-handed. But how do you balance that with the obvious need to be secure? Because we know we can't afford another one.
Yeah, I think this is a huge challenge when you're talking about securing soft targets or major events and venues. I mean, we've seen this, we've talked about this in the context of Super Bowls or national special security events where you can surge security and you can have certain inconveniences tied to a major event. But an event like the Boston Marathon that is so widespread, so ingrained in the sort of the Patriot Day dimension of the holiday in Boston and in Massachusetts, you don't want to suppress the joy and the interconnectedness of the community of those events. And so you're right, the balance is really tough because you've got to secure the event, you've got to make people feel secure, they have to be secure, but you can't impede the event itself. And I think that's the major challenge for Homeland Security officials across the board and around the country. How do you secure soft targets in a way that's effective without doing damage to the very event and the freedom of movement and commerce that you want at these kinds of events?
It's important to set the tone that we have to go on here.
Right.
We have to live. We can't be cowed by the terrorists.
Right. And one thing that's both discouraging but encouraging about the Boston Marathon episode is intelligence is always the key to this. You know this, Bob, from your great reporting on the intelligence community, Homeland Security. Intelligence is the driver. Can you pinpoint those actors that are suspect or potentially problematic? Here we actually did in some ways. We had some indicators.
We had some clues.
We had some clues. It wasn't enough, and it certainly wasn't enough to prevent the attack. But if you can do that effectively, that ultimately is your greatest safeguard against attacks on soft targets.
Well, it's one we'll keep an eye on for sure. Juan, thanks as always.
Thank you, Bob.
And thanks to you again for watching Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. We'll see you next time.